So it's really good to be able to welcome Stephen Singleton to this little conversation that we've been working through of meeting different organisations that have been supporting people in Suffolk. So Stephen, you're with the Suffolk Community Foundation. Perhaps you'll just tell us a little bit about the history of the foundation itself.
Yeah, the history. So we're the best kept secret, Colin. Most people don't know community foundations. They're not a charity that's a household name. But the UK has total coverage by community foundations. There are 46 community foundations operating across the UK. And the oldest one is 40 years old, 45, come out 45 years old. They were developed in three phases, basically. So there was one created in the 80s, then about a third developed in the 90s, a third in the 80s, a third in the 90s, and the third in the early 2000s. And Suffolk and Norfolk Community Foundations and Cambridgeshire Community Foundations were unbelievably one of the last community foundations to be formed in the UK. So why, do we ask ourselves? Well, I think if you look at those counties, on the surface, they seem incredibly comfortable, very pleasant places to live, don't have many social problems, do we? Well, we do. We have the same. But the community foundations are called for local people, and often in Suffolk and rural counties, typically our needs are often hidden. So we do some research called hidden needs. We have the same level of needs, but it's hidden, it's disguised, and it's often masked by affluence. So we were formed in 2005. I was the founding director of the Community Foundation in Suffolk. We've just finished our 15th year. And though it grows year on year, we've raised over £50 million in that time. Bearing in the first year it was £32,000, and last year it was 6.3 million. And that money goes in two ways. It goes into grant making for the voluntary sector, and it also goes into investment funds, which we call endowed funds, so that people can create a trust-like vehicle that's held with the foundation. So we have about 70 private funds that we manage on behalf of families and individuals, and some companies as well. And they use this as a way to lay down money, to provide grant making from the investment return in perpetuity, in theory. So a lot of our funds are in perpetuity funds. So it's really exciting to think of an organization as we develop over the years, and in theory we're a very safe charity to do that because of this endowment. We should always be around, barring an absolute catastrophe, a meteorite strike or something. But as we develop, that endowment will get bigger, and therefore the ability to be able to help the most vulnerable people in our communities and to finance the voluntary sector to do that work will increase. And that was the thing that excited me when I first heard of community foundations, that very long-term vision to create something that becomes bigger as it goes on.
So perhaps you could just talk through that a little bit in terms of where do you get your income from, and where does it flow out to?
Yeah. So the major thrust of community foundations, or major specialism of community foundations, is that we develop, it's a grand word, but it's the right word, we develop philanthropy. So we work with in the private sector, individuals, companies, company owners, often families, because often people that have created wealth want their children to see the life in its totality, and working with the voluntary sector can do that. So we work with those, and it could be all sorts of circumstances that allow people to have sufficient wealth that they can put it into a fund or give it to us on an annual basis. We work with typically high net worth individuals, but not always. Sometimes people are left a legacy and they want to put it to good. Sometimes people just don't have, well, even if you don't have a family and you're going to leave your house today, the average house is significant in value. So there's all sorts of ways you can leave it. And the other thing, great, beautiful thing about working with individuals, you can leave it under the family name. So often they're not openly in memoriam funds, but they're to remember someone. And of course, this exists in society. You know, people often do that, but they put it with a lawyer or an accounts firm, and they're run there. The other advantage with the Community Foundation is because we're a grant maker, we see the need every day, and it's constantly peaking and spiking. So we can really, hopefully, deliver the biggest impact against that philanthropy. So that's our main business. But the beauty of doing that is, of course, what happens, we become an expert in of need in our localities, and we're all typically county-wide organisations. So Suffolk Community Foundation, Norfolk Community Foundation, and so on. So we become really, well, in our case, we become experts in Suffolk. We know exactly where there's county lines, where there's food poverty, where there's poor attainment in schools, and we can help those areas via bringing in the relevant voluntary organisation with funding through our income generation. And that becomes interesting for other sectors. So the next area we work with is with public sector. So these are local authorities, police and crime commissioners, and we're working with health now. Because if you understand deprivation like we do, you realize that a lot of society's issues are, the ground zero is deprivation. That often limits educational attainment, for example. It can, all sorts of things. So if you tackle that, you start to tackle other agendas. So public sector working is key for us. And then the third area we work with is other trusts and foundations, believe it or not. So these are often national trusts. We work with Comic Relief, for example, over the years. Comic Relief are national. We work with the Lottery. They're national charities, but they don't have the eyes and the ears on the ground that we do. So if they are tackling childhood poverty and they want to hit that, how can they be experts all over the UK? They can't. So where they feel they don't have the local intelligence, they will often use community foundations. So that's the other. So between those three, it's actually quite a nice model. The private sector, public sector, and third sector, the charitable trust, we're truly working across all of them. And that's where the income comes from.
Yeah. Okay. So how would you suggest if people say they have a legacy and they're thinking, I want to give money away? There's lots of national charities they could use. What's so different about the Community Foundation?
Yeah, and I think that's at the core of Community Foundation work, is actually putting a spotlight on the local need. So Community Foundation model was stumbled across. It started in America over 100 years ago now. And the guy that created the first Community Foundation was a major philanthropist. So he, giving on a very wide area, but he realized when he gave locally, his enjoyment was so much higher. Well, why? Well, unless you're Bill Gates and you can jump on a plane and see what the good you're doing in Africa, which is great, but most people can't do that. So they give to a charity because they have empathy with the cause. It's probably touched their life in some way, whatever that charity is. But you rarely see it being used. If you give locally and you work with a community foundation, we can hold your hand. You can go and visit that charity. You can find other charities that are doing similar work. And what's more, it's often a voyage of discovery because local charities tend to be smaller. They don't have the marketing budgets. They're not in the public arena. And you can often find that people stumble across a charity that's right on their doorstep, literally. So the connection becomes far stronger. And we often have people that give financially through the foundation, discover a charity, and then go and help it directly. So it's a journey. But the other thing is kind of society changes. So you may have an idea that you want to, you have a legacy, you could set up your own charity and support something. But there are challenges to that. The cause might be sorted out, it might go. By going through the foundation, knowing that we're going to be here, hopefully forever, you can say, you can be quite broad. I want to support young people. That's where it starts. And we can take you on various journeys, and it just becomes much more engaging. So what does that do? That refuels the virtual cycle that you continually give through your fund or to the foundation, if you don't need a fund, to that cause. And actually, it might lead somewhere else. We take people on a journey.
Yeah, so once you've, say, raised funds, or people have created a legacy or a fund within the auspices of the Community Foundation, what are the ways in which it then gets distributed? How does that work? Do you give directly to people, or how are you addressing those issues?
So the way it works is, first of all, just give you a size of the sector. There are 3,000 registered charities in Suffolk, just under, marginally under. And we estimate that there are probably 5,000 community groups that have a governance model that are not registered. The Charity Commission, they don't need to be registered because of their size. So it's a large market as such. And we know an awful lot of them. We have a huge database, and the longer you're around, the more you know these organizations. So what happens when we get a grants program, whether it's a central government program or comic relief one or a family fund, doesn't matter. We promote that through our own systems, using, depending on the size of it, but using media, local media, BBC, East Anglian Daily Times, the local papers, our website, and obviously e-bulletins. Once you're on our website, you're being e-bulletin regularly with new funding availabilities, new funds that are coming on, and that then creates the interest, and people go to our website. There's an online form related to that fund that they've just heard about. They fill in the form. When we don't know them, we obviously carry out quite strong due diligence, checking their governance, their management style, what their board of trustees is like, what's their finances. They apply for the money, and we take it to the grants panel. And the grants panel can be made up of independent experts from the community. We don't make the decision, we do all the assessment, but we detach ourselves from that decision making. It has to be, we feel we have to be removed from that, otherwise we're judge and juror, or we're not that. Or if it's a family fund, it can be carried out by the family. And of course, they might not have all the information then there might be some gaps in their knowledge. We do the assessment, we give them all the work, and they can ask us questions, and we can bounce that back. And then they make a decision. So it is a competitive process. And over the course of a year, last year, we made about 850 grants. So that's an average, I think, of about 4,500 without doing my maths, but it's something like that. Mm-hmm. But it can range from a few £100s right up to a six-figure sum. Yeah.
But the good thing is, for the person who's originated that gift, is that there's some due diligence going on in that outcome. So it's not just someone knocking on the door.
It is really absolute due diligence. And often in the case of corporates, for example, businesses, this is key for them, because companies are often hit left, right, and centre from asked from the community. You're making a judgment on the person in front of you. That can be very good, but sometimes it can be wrong. But also, there aren't bottomless pits of money, so you have to kind of manage that. And what people do, what companies particularly do with us, but it can apply with people as well. If it's known that they have wealth, they can be protected this way. They say, well, absolutely, I love what you do. I have a fund with the Community Foundation, go there. And then if their fund has distributed the money that year, but we still think it's a good application, what we're trying to do is place it with another fund. So the net result is the organisation stands a chance of getting funded somewhere, and everyone's good people in the whole, everyone's happy. Reputations are intact. And it's never, touch wood, it's never happened. I touched my desk, it's never happened. But if a grant does go horribly wrong, fraudulent or something like that, then again, for a business, that can be a reputational risk. But by using a professional grant maker in the process, if it does go wrong, it wouldn't be easier for me. We've made the mistake, and I'd have to sort that out. But we do put some distance between the funder and the situation if it's gone wrong. As I say, it's never gone wrong, but it could do, and we're always mindful of that.
Prepared for that. So how did you get involved? You said that you've been involved with the foundation.
So well, how did I get involved? I was a bit like you, Colin. I was not in the voluntary sector at all. I was running a company in the UK. I was the chief executive of the UK operations for an American-German group, and I wasn't looking for a job. What happened was, in those giddy days, so this is about 16 years ago now, I had a business coach, and I went to work one day, and I had my business coach that all the senior execs had, and I used to volunteer at the hospice in Ipswich, St Elizabeth Hospice, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, to the point I didn't realise how much I spoke about it, or just about what I was doing. And a job had been placed to start the Community Foundation, which was called for by it's kind of about half a dozen civil leaders in the county. And they raised a tiny bit of money to hire the first employee to get the thing up and running. Had no name. We were going to be a community foundation, clearly, but didn't need much thought there. But we did have a different name at the beginning. Created it on the Charity Commission website and so on. So I went to work, and this mentor said to me, "This job's appeared." And the first line was, I remember it very well, the first line was, "Are you passionate about Suffolk?" Which I am. It then had about 10 lines of business stuff, money management, customer service, da, da, da. And the final one was, do you have any voluntary sector experience? Which I didn't think I did. I just was a volunteer somewhere in my mind. And he said, that job's you. You've got to go for that. So I said, well, you're not a very good mentor telling me to do that. And then I went to the hospice that Friday night on duty. And as I went in, the volunteer manager came out and said, I've thinking about you this week. I saw a job advertised. You should go for it. And I still ignored it. And then I went to a dinner party 2 weeks later, and so some friends, and the wife of the friend said, this job's appeared. It's you. And if you don't go for it, it won't come up for 10 years. So I threw my hat in the ring, pulled a CV together, and here we are.
Amazing.
That was my journey. So there's a bit of fate involved, really.
Yeah, you haven't looked back.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure it has its challenges since you've started, and I'm sure that you've seen a massive change. But how have the last few months been compared to any other time that you've been involved?
Yeah, probably like for everyone, it's kind of the word I was using at the beginning was, it seems surreal that we're going through such strange times, and it really has been the most full-on experience that I've ever gone through in my life. My major concern is for the team. We're all working remotely now from home, and you know, this is a vocation at the end of the day. They do give far more than is probably good for their health, so I have to manage that. But it happened, the emergency for us kicked off incredibly quickly. Within 2 days of within 1 day, on day 2 of us going into lockdown, we had launched the emergency fund. So all our grant making was going on as normal around other activities, but we launched an emergency fund, and by working with local media, here we are. I forget how many weeks, well, it's 4 months later, isn't it? We've raised £1.6 million worth of emergency funding in that time, and distributed about 1.3, I think it is today. And I would have thought, if you had asked me 4 months ago, would we be through it by then? I would have said, well, I hope so. And in reality, we're not. It's morphing into something else. So our emergency funding is now, we're looking at rebuilding lives. You know, there's going to be huge unemployment. There are serious spikes of mental health happening. We've got the highest level of food bank usage we've ever had. In fact, probably 4 times the level that we've ever had in the county. Our citizens' advice are inundated with help. All our counselling services are becoming overloaded. And at the end of the day, they need funding to do that. And our emergency funding and rebuilding lives funding is doing its share of activity there. So is it stressful? It could be stressful. I think we're still running on adrenaline to some degree. It's certainly quite exhausting to be confronted with this level of challenge. Yeah.
What impact has it had on the work itself? So it sounds like you went into fundraising mode almost instantaneously.
Yeah, instantaneously. Yeah. So well, it's
yeah. Sorry, both in terms of the needs that you're called on, and also what income you've mentioned that's been a very good response. But maybe there's specific sources where that's come from. How's that all occurred over the last few weeks?
A huge, you know, the public by and large have really stepped up. So, you know, it's uplifting stories, really. You know, people sending us bits of their pension that's left over, all sorts of, you know, very, very generous gifts for people that don't have a lot of money. So it's widened our remit. You know, it's traditional fundraising, but a lot of money has come from our funds, fund holders. I just before this, one of our fundraisers just was on his own grant panel, and on behalf of the family, it spent its money, so he just put another £10,000 through. I mean, that's a huge gift to support this program. And we've also been working with the National Emergency Trust, which has set up in the wake of Grenfell. So Community Foundation is heavily involved in the National Emergency Trust, and it's to coordinate appeals such as this. So community foundations up and down the country are typically in the front line of any emergency, whether it's flooding appeals, which we're unfortunately become experts at in recent years, not in Suffolk, though one day we could do with coastal erosion, but certainly in the West Country, north in Yorkshire, all over the place, community foundations are to the fore there. And London Community Foundation was very heavily involved with Grenfell. But what happened there was that there were three major funders. British Red Cross were there. I can't remember, the Salvation Army, I think, was the other one, three of us. And it could have been done better. It could have been coordinated, and we realised that. So the National Emergency Trust was formed to coordinate those major charities, but also to channel the public's appeal through, because on the back of Grenfell, I've heard it said that there were 10,000 Just Giving pages created. So that's good, but raising the money is one thing. Getting it to some of the most difficult, getting it through the most difficult circumstances is really, really tough. And that's true of any grant making. Getting it to the front line quickly is the hard bit. And it often needs a skill approach.
How's that shown itself in the last few months then? Obviously, you've raised a huge amount very quickly, but how are you able to get it into the front line?
It has. Well, again, it's the beautiful kind of mechanism of grant making, really. If you put an appeal out to the organisations that are in the front line and saying, are you in the front line of COVID-19? If you are, tell us what you're doing via an application form. What are you doing? What's your need? What's the shortage? Where do you need more money? What are you going to do with it? Those sort of questions. It comes forward in droves, and it comes left field. You discover things that actually, if you were too prescriptive, you wouldn't necessarily find them. I mean, if you think about our rural communities, this happened in our towns as well, but the response from a few people in the community to set up a small food provision or to collect medicine or those things have often happened without any support, but sometimes they do need a mobile phone and they need some coordination, and those small grants have made a huge difference. And I think one of the legacies of this emergency is that level of community spirit. We've seen it it's been overwhelming. It's been unbelievable. And it might be here to stay. We might be developing, hopefully, we might have that carrying on into the future. So, I forgot what the question was, but
no, that's all right. Yeah. So let's just talk about the types of organisations that you've been trying to help. You've had to help.
So it's that, and then it's the obvious ones in the front line. So as I say, food banks have been the growth has been unbelievable. We have, at the last count, 51 food banks operating across Suffolk. Some people think you can just turn up at a food bank and come away with a food parcel. It's a lot harder than that. Traditionally, you would be referred to by either social services or a professional organisation that's known to the food bank, or the Citizens Advice, for example. And then it's not an open-ended offer. You're given an emergency food parcel. And most food banks, the original ones anyway, the traditional ones, operate other services to get you out of that debt. What's the circumstances that you're there, and how can they help you out of that? And that can be one organisation working with a group of organisations. But during this emergency, an awful lot of people have lost their job, and the money's run out very, very quickly. And that's particularly around 0-hour contracts, or it's typically around where both partners are working and they've got a family, but the children are home now. So one has to give up a job. And if you're in rented accommodation, which the average rent, I think, across Suffolk, or the lowest rent actually, is about £650 a month. That's a lot of money. And if you need two bread earners and you haven't got it, something's going to break. So that's one area. All the advice organisations, of which the Citizen Advice is the most known, but there are lots of them in one form or another. Specialist ones working with people with disability, for example, across the county. They've all been inundated, and I daren't say a figure, Colin, of how much more business they are handling, how much more client casework they're handling, because by the time I say it, it'll be out of date. But the growth is extraordinary, and I don't even think we've hit the level of unemployment that we are going to hit yet. It's going to get bigger. So they're very active. And then you've got all the other sort of support systems, which are around everything from isolation, basically mental health issues, from isolation of older people through to people that are getting counselling through for all sorts of abuse or whatever, their addiction, all those sort of services. And we've seen a lot of those charities really develop new ways of reaching their client groups, because social distancing has stopped them seeing those people on a face-to-face basis. So it's become online, or it's become via telephones. And again, that's needing costs that has costs involved to develop the technology and have the equipment to be able to do it with your volunteers or your staff, depending how you're set up to deliver those services. So there's been a need to fund that sort of thing as well. Unfortunately, some charities have done the equivalent through no fault of their own, a kind of furloughing, where they've just put on ice because they can't deliver their services. There's a wonderful charity that offers sailing for people with disability in Alton Broad, and we've had conversations with them, and sadly they can't get their disabled sailors on the water because of social distancing, and but they've still got to keep their fleet there. They've got to pay their rents, so they don't think they're actually going to be active again until next year. And they're just a marvelous charity, and that's an example of many that have found it very difficult to deliver their services during this lockdown.
How do you see the situation developing over the next few months then?
Well,
is it going to transition, or is it much of the same?
Sadly, it's quite precarious. I mean, we've seen Age UK Suffolk, which was a national charity, part of a national franchise or federation. They've had to close their doors, 150 employees. So that's one of our very biggest charities. And we are in the privilege and honor position that we see the finances of organizations as they apply to us. What we're seeing is with charities carry reserves. Charities very rarely borrow money. In fact, sometimes they can't borrow money. So the way charity finance operates is they carry a reserve, which is basically a buffer to support either closure or the peaks and troughs of their activity. And that you're encouraged to do that by Charity Commission, our regulator. Well, we're seeing that reserve level drop alarmingly. And if it gets to the point where it wouldn't support closure, then the charity has to think about its future. So sadly, I don't think it'll be the end. I think we will see the closure of some charities. But there are good things as well, or positive things from that observation, is that Suffolk, generally the local charities are relatively small, highly effective, but relatively small. In fact, at the last count, 52% of our charities had an income of under £10,000 a year. So this is a bit of rent, probably putting the electric lights on and so on, and mainly volunteers. And those sort of charities will continue. So that's the good thing. And then we only have about 10 with an income over £1 million. So again, the top end is relatively limited, but we have an awful lot that are in that real danger zone. So the foundation will do its bit. We're working closely with other funders, and we're working very, very closely with public sector at the moment to try and find support systems, because it's not only money sometimes, it's other hurdles and obstacles they're coming across to function, to try and offer a holistic solution for them so we get through this together.
So, yeah, it's going to be quite a challenge, isn't it, to get through
it is.
Some of those things. We've got almost a moving target ahead of you. So what are the things that you're looking for from the people of Suffolk? Where I think Suffolk people needed?
Well, that's a good lead in there, because there's two things really. But actually, I would have, even if we didn't have an emergency, I would have said these two things. I think we know Suffolk is an incredibly generous county. We actually have a really good community spirit across the whole county, and that's one of the reasons why people love living in Suffolk. So we're good at that. But because our voluntary sector is often small, it doesn't shout at you from the places it's working at. It's under the radar. So my ask of anyone, and actually my suggestion for anyone that either wants to give in a financial way, or importantly, give of their time, they're both forms of philanthropy. Look local. Find out, you'll know what you're interested in. So ring one of the organisations, ring the foundation, or ring Community Action Suffolk, go to their website and say, I'm interested in working in X place and I want to support Y people, whether that's financial or whether that is in time, and find out who your local charities are. And I guarantee that by seeing your efforts have an impact locally, that the enjoyment factor will be absolutely huge. It worked for me. It made me jump sector.
Yeah, goodness, that's definitely impacted on your life.
It's life-changing. Yeah, for so many people that we deal with, it's absolutely life-changing. And you know, we're in a fortunate position that most of our giving is done through people that have the freedom to do that. A lot of charities rely on fundraising activity. We do very little fundraising because we often would be competing with the very charities we're trying to support. So, but it is life-changing to see the people. You know, some of them I've now been working with for nearly as long as the foundation, 14 years, and I've seen them go on a journey, and the enjoyment they get from however big it is, however small it is, of giving of time or money is just amazing, absolutely amazing.
And do you think every charity that operates in Suffolk knows about the Community Foundation?
I think yes. I think charities, yes. As you go, yeah, absolutely. I'll be very surprised if there's any charities that don't know this. If they are, they're relatively newly formed, because they're, you know, all kind of direction when money is raised comes to the foundation. But community, you know, real neighbourhood community groups, no, not everyone would do there. And often the need they have is, you know, probably a few £100 to get something up and running. But actually, it's not that we're against that. We've got to be lighter touch for them, and we've got to be far more flexible. Because putting them through the rigors of a larger charity is disproportionate. So we're becoming better at it. We often work through parish councils, for example. If the parish council has some sparky people, as we call them, in their community want to do something, and it fits in with our general funding aims, which there are many, and it's a few £100, sometimes it's the best few £100 we've ever spent. And the reason why is once people achieve something in their neighbourhood and they get enjoyment out of it, you'll get fragments of it will fragment, and other people will do things, and suddenly the whole community is beginning to happen. So I can give you so many examples, but I've seen kind of villages that, you know, one village that's close to my heart, it planted a woodland that was to celebrate the millennium. So it started kind of 3 years up front, collecting acorns and things, and with the Green Light Trust, they planted a woodland, and that woodland now, 20 years on, is quite a significant thing, and it has an outdoor classroom for the local school. But the real result of it, I think, was they went on to do so many things. When the community shop shut, the same people and some more people open a community shop. That community shop is so successful, it generates money, which has renovated the community hall. They've now got a cafe there. It goes on and on and on. One activity leads on to another, and it's just, you know, I think again, it's another form of collective philanthropy, isn't it? It's the same thing. It's just people giving back to the things they love, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely superb. Well, thank you so much for just sharing a little bit about the work, which I think with the Community Foundation, we could listen to stories for hours on end, because it reaches into so many parts of our lives.
Thank you, Colin.
Stephen, thank you for sharing some time with us today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this great initiative.
That's right. We'll try and get the word out to people of Suffolk.
Cheerio. Bye.